right, friends, it is that time once again. Happy Saturday from Awesemo.com. This is CFB Live Before the Lock. We have got the last regular season slate of the season. I am Ben Reza. I am joined, as I always am, by Matt Kajeski. We are here to break down the second half of rivalry week. Matt, we got some, interesting games capped by a wild North Carolina State game last night. But I assume you are more excited for the Saturday slate, which has some big time matchups on it.
Yeah, yesterday was a really good day, so happy with that. Excited for some of the big games today. Basically, the Big Ten, they come down to the Ohio State-Michigan game today. So I think that's the biggest one we need to watch on the day. And that's not really for DFS. That's just for viewing pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's different storylines from the playoffs to the betting to the DFS, and they certainly intersect, but we're going to do our best to break down all 13 of these bad boys on the screen, and we will do what we can. All right, before we do, though, friends at Prize Picks sponsoring the show. They're sponsoring it yesterday. Hopefully they'll be sponsoring it in the future as well. They've done a great job all year. Obviously a site that you guys should be playing with. And even though college football is winding down, there's no reason not to take advantage as well, because they have every sport over there. And what you're going to be doing, you're getting started, you're picking 2, 3, 4, or 5 players, and you're going to project, are they going over or under a given category? So rushing yards, higher or lower, receiving touchdowns, higher or lower, things like that. And again, they've got the NBA, they've got the NFL, they've got all the sports that you guys want. Download that app in the App Store on Google Play. Make your first deposit using the promo code Awesemo. You can get that instant deposit match of up to $100. Matt, we've been taking advantage of some of these softer lines. I know I mentioned yesterday I like Garwo over 0.5 rushing touchdowns. I know Boston College apparently has a million guys sick with the flu, and we'll talk about that. One more, and I know you'll like this. Your boy, Kent State's quarterback, Crum, over 258.5 passing yards today. What do you think about that?
I love Crum. That offense is dynamic, and their defense can't stop anybody. So they're always in favorable scripts for the pass. Crum can get it done both ways on the ground and with his arm. So any sort of overs here, I like. They're just not priced high enough for the total of this game.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We both like Kent State in the game. It should be a wild shootout there. That's one with implications in the MAC. And certainly you want to keep an eye on that. But from a betting standpoint, one of my favorite games. But all right, we've got 13. And certainly we're going to talk about Prize Picks throughout the show. But let's get this started. You guys can get it started in chat by hitting that like button, showing the support. But I don't structure the games, and it is a noon game, but we get things started in a big way here. Let's go to the game, Ohio State and Michigan. Everyone is talking about it. Obviously, this is one that, we're going to have a ton of interest in from a lot of different perspectives. Michigan is taking all the money. It's down to 7, over under at 64.5. So it's a pretty good game from a DFS perspective. Let's start with the road team in Ohio State. Looks like Stroud is on the fast track to win the Heisman. He's got the best receiving corps in the country. The big question is, will the Michigan pressure stifle this, or do you think that Stroud and these receivers are still a premier stack today?
I don't think the Michigan pressure will stifle it. They get most of it from Aiden Hutchinson. And Michigan's defense has benefited from a very easy schedule of competition. And they've actually struggled in the 2 notable games they played this year. Nebraska almost beat them. And then Michigan State, obviously, they moved the ball very well, particularly through the air. So Stroud, I do not think, is in a difficult matchup. He's beaten better teams. And he's averaging 350 yards per game through the air, not mobile. But with the pass catchers he has, it's very unlikely that he does not reach the 300-yard bonus. You just have to weigh that with his price. And it is a tight slate again. There's not a lot of value at marquee position. So Stroud, he's somebody you will have to make concessions in the rest of your lineup, but the ceiling is certainly there. And I don't have a preference between his pass catchers. I think you just flip a coin between Olave, Wilson, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. They essentially all have the same target share and the same skill set. And they're used like in a rotation around the formation. So no preferences to the pass catchers. I think you try to play one of them, if not 2, if you're stacking Stroud.
What do you do with then the backfield? Travion Henderson, obviously, in a game like this, they should be using him as much as they possibly can. It could be very, very, very competitive. I think it's going to be. Where does he fall in the priorities?
He is now going to benefit from Master Teague being out again, and Travion Henderson will carry a larger workload in competitive games. 7-point spread here, so just a touchdown. In the last 2 games that were semi-close, Henderson 28 and 21 carries. He's active in the pass game too. He had 8 targets in that span. Now without Master Teague, it just narrows the rotation even more. They only have Mayan Williams as a change of pace. So he's an excellent play And this late news means he should be under-owned. I switched off some of my Brian Robinson and Braylon Allen and moved more towards Henderson in this spot. Again, it has an immense total, way better than the Wisconsin total overall. And it's even about 7 points better, 8 points better than the Alabama total. So I like Henderson quite a bit as a tournament play. He's excellent there.
On the other side, Michigan has a formula and it's working. Run the ball with Haskins, and certainly Corum, when he's healthy, can chip in there. Don't let McNamara do anything crazy. He does seem capable, but I assume on a 13-game slate, you're not looking to stack up the Michigan pass catchers.
I am not. I think at best you could use one of them as a run back. That is still not a situation I like. Cornelius Johnson is too expensive for his role. He's averaging 5.5 targets per game. Again, we expect that to increase because of game script. But even like Dalen Baldwin, Roman Wilson, Mike St. Reese, so these guys are all rotating on and off the field. It's not a situation I love here. I think if anything, you could maybe look to Corum as the pass catching back. I'm not really worried about the injury today. He warmed up last week. He's warming up right now. They held him out of precaution, and this is the biggest game of Michigan's season. So I expect Corum to be active. In what capacity, I'm not sure. But even if Corum's out for whatever reason, Haskins, he's a little bit less desirable. He ceded 11 targets to Donovan Edwards last week. The pass catching role Haskins had seen without Corum in the 2 previous weeks was completely erased. So Haskins, he's basically just your early down thumper, and he doesn't have any access points to pass catching, whether or not Corum plays. So the whole Michigan team is very difficult to get to. Corum is cheap, but you're worried about the injury. I do have some of him, a very, very small amount in tournaments.
Anything else that you want to talk about for this game? Any side, priorities for cash, anything else?
Nobody is a priority for cash in this game for me. There's just a lot of great alternatives. This is a spot where everybody on Ohio State is priced up significantly, and they're great tournament plays because of the upside. But for cash, I mean, all the receivers are going to cannibalize each other to a degree, and they're difficult to predict. Henderson, he just has a tendency to get phased out of games when Ohio State gets up by a lot. And that is very possible in this game. If they get up by 2-3 scores, you're going to see Mine Williams.
You bet the game?
I bet Ohio State.
I took
7.5, very comfortable with 7. I'm very willing to take that.
Yeah, as a Michigan backer, I'm not going to bet it at 7. If that happens, I'll just take the money line. If 7.5 pops back, I'll probably be on the Wolverines side. I think it's going to be a very competitive game. I think Michigan has a real shot to win the game, but there are better spots out there. Let's keep it going, though. DraftKings switched the order of games, so apologies for that, but we're going to go off the left-hand side. Maryland and Rutgers. Maryland's a 1.5-point favorites going into Rutgers, 53-point total. These are pretty bad Big Ten teams, but Maryland has been an access point for some big scores, as you mentioned in the past. Tagovailoa and certainly Raheem Jarrett. Now some of the injuries have happened. So how do you think a team like this falls in the 26 that we're dealing with today?
Maryland's a decent target. Rutgers, there's a couple guys because of price that are interesting. Tagovailoa here, he just passes the ball so much that he'll backdoor his way to 300-yard games. He's becoming more and more difficult to stack. They're using a rotation at receiver. Jarrett has been extremely up and down as the replacement number 1 for Dante Demas. Don't feel great about Raheem Jarrett at this point and his price. I would rather either just go all the way up or all the way down, and we can talk about the stars and scrubs approach to lineups later. But you also have the same thing with Carlos Carrier, the number 2. He's 4,700, hasn't seen more than 6 targets in the last 3 games. Daryl Jones splitting time directly with Brian Cobbs for the 3. It's tough to get to any of them. And Chico Conquo maybe is the most interesting, their tight end. He's at least 7 targets in 3 straight games, only 4,400. We expect Maryland to score some points. It's just going to be tough to figure out the distribution with 5 active pass catchers. And then they have been increasingly rotating their backs. One thing that's really interesting here is Colby Macdonald outcarried Tayon Fleet Davis 18-10 in their most recent contest. Fleet Davis was still more efficient, so I'm not sure this is a trend that's going to continue moving forward. But Colby Macdonald is the minimum price, and he's now outcarried Fleet Davis in 2 straight games, and we are starved for value. So in optimals, a couple of these near min price backs pop. I rotated a few of them into tournaments. So Colby Macdonald is not a terrible play. He's just tournament viable because the workload is insecure, whatever.
Yeah, your point still stands. No doubt about it. On the other side, Rutgers, it's been not great lately, and that's kind of an understatement. They didn't score last week. They had 3 points against Wisconsin. Some of better defenses, but what do you expect for them here against Maryland?
I love your point that they scored last week.
I mean, they're trying, but it's been bad.
Yeah, it's bad. Again, the only thing you're looking at here is maybe a near min price Shameen Jones because Aaron Cruikshank is out. And he hasn't even had good volume of late. 4.3 targets per game over the last 4. Melton sees like an alpha workload, but the scoring expectations low, and he's 5,100. So you just have to make concessions if you want to play him. And I'm not willing to make concessions for a Rutgers player. Vidral is not active enough in either the run or the pass game for consideration. And they're now using a 4-way committee at running back.
So I assume just not a team, certainly not towards the top.
I thought I'd have more interest in this game than I do. And I think it comes down to it has a 53-point total. Typically, I'm stacking Maryland, but the total's just not good.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, again, we got a lot of games to choose from. We'll see what opens up. You did mention starve for value. That does seem to be a theme here. I assume, just jumping what we talked about yesterday, you're back to 2 quarterbacks today, looking at the slate.
Yep. Well, yesterday, you didn't have to. Today, I think it would be a mistake not to play 2.
Got it. Florida State going to Florida. The Seminoles 3-point underdog, 59-point total. I know you like the over in this game. That is one of the bets that you got out early in the week. I jumped on that as well with you. I like Florida State in the game, and I want to talk about them. So Jordan Travis, obviously, he's going to give you some dual threat ability. I guess the question is, if you do want to roll a guy like that, do you play him alone? Do you find a pass catcher? What do you do with someone like that for Florida State?
I think you play him by himself. Nobody on Florida State has had over 5 targets in the last 2 games. They did have a 7-target getter in their 3rd most recent game. But again, nobody's averaging more than 33 receiving yards. Nobody's averaging more than 4 targets a game. You would need like multiple touchdowns on really low volume to hit a ceiling score if you stack Travis. But he's very active on the ground. 15 and 8 designed runs over the last 2 games. And that does not include his scrambles. And he scrambles quite a bit. He still is not expensive. And Florida's defense has recently shown a lot more cracks than they did earlier in the year. Their season numbers are actually pretty good, but you've noted like some of the opponents that Florida has just hemorrhaged points to of late. That's a reason why we jumped on the over really early in the week. And Travis, he could be somebody you just use by himself. Completely fine with that. Not interested in the runners anymore. The backs, that is. Corbin in a timeshare with Trayshawn Ward and Toafili when he's healthy. Plus Travis siphoning off so many designed runs does not help Corbin.
On the other side, obviously, Florida hit straight rock bottom. They lost to Missouri. They got their coach fired. I don't know what to expect from this team, but I do want to ask you, we've got a couple, tags with these quarterbacks. What is the status of Jones and Richardson? How do you think that shakes out? Do we have news?
They're both warming up right now. Jones returned to practice. I'm not expecting there to be much difference from what we've seen throughout the year. They're both going to play, and that's just going to sap any value from anyone on Florida. Can't really stack them. The targets are volatile. They use 5 receivers at times when you include their tight end gamble. They use 3 running backs. Even though they have a nice implied team total in Florida State has hemorrhaged points, the only way you are playing a Gator is if Emory Jones was out and he's warming up.
Anything else from Florida? I mean, obviously you mentioned at quarterback, it can be a little difficult. Does that, I mean, the running backs have really never been in play, but someone like Copeland on the outside shorter, anything in terms of pass catchers?
Copeland's just too expensive for his role. If I'm playing one, it's going to be Trent Whitmore, who returned from injury. He's been a starting wide receiver, and he immediately came back and played a majority of the snaps last week. But again, only 3 targets, and that's basically what you're going to get from these Florida receivers. Unless he catches a bomb, very unlikely that he's in the optimal lineup.
All right. Well, like I said, we can save some time there. It's funny. It's a game that we both like the over, but it's true. We're labeling it kind of the Georgia theme where some of these teams, they produce, a lot of production, but it's not funneled to specific players. It really doesn't make concentrated output. And that can be very, very difficult. And I think Florida is one of those teams. We'll keep it moving. We can always circle back if we have some time. Wake Forest, 5-point favorites at Boston College, 64-point total. Wake is a team that, they've had an impressive year. Obviously, at times we've seen their defense rise up and just make them non-competitive in some of these games. But from a DFS standpoint, it's just absolutely fantastic. Clemson handled them relatively easily. What do you expect from them here? You've got Hartman and these pass catchers. Where do they fall in terms of premier stacks today?
This is a great game to stack. 64-point total. 2 giving defenses on both sides for Boston College. Actually, for both these teams, it's mainly via the run. And Hartman is active in the run game, so that's something you can certainly target here. He's 292 yards on the ground this year, averages 315 as a passer, the total 64. Roberson and Perry are a little expensive compared to some other receivers on this slate. Like everybody's going to be playing David Bell and probably like Keaton Thompson. But if you pay up a little bit just for Roberson or Perry, you can change your lineup just a bit and gain some leverage with this stack. And I think it is going to come in under-owned. I do not care who you play between the two. The volume between them, they're only separated by 2 targets on the year, less than 100 yards. And Roberson missed a game, so they're basically neck and neck in terms of production. No preference between the receivers. Stack one of them with Hartman. If you want to play somebody much cheaper, you could look to Taylor Morin. He's the wide receiver 3 for this offense. They will rotate Donald Stewart and Keyshawn Williams on the field on occasion, but it is still pretty much Morin. He would be the cheap player to look at. And I think there is some interest in the backfield. It's really tough because Christian Beal-Smith has been hurt. Justice Allison missed their last game, and they moved right to a timeshare. So you can't really access this good matchup. Cooley is the min price, and he had 8 carries in their last game. He led the backfield in carries. I think you could throw a dart at him in tournaments, but I think for Wake, you're basically just stacking Hartman with one of the 2 receivers, Perry or Roberson.
In terms of, you just mentioned another min back. If you had to play one of them, would you go with him or the guy from Maryland?
I would probably play McDonald had the larger workload, and I think there's going to be less mouths to feed there. It would probably be him.
On the other side, so this news has come across that Boston College has a bunch of guys that are sick, and a lot of guys are, questionable. It's hard to get some information. Where do you stand on something like that? How do you break down? Because they're in a great matchup. Wake Forest's defense is terrible, but certainly they could be without some key personnel if these guys are in fact that sick.
It looks like only Jalen Gill is the impactful player here. It said 32 players have been impacted, so I'm guessing some of them are on the comeback from this. I don't know when it happened, and you probably had some players dealing with this last week too. But right now, only Gill is listed as a game time decision among their starting offensive skill players. So I think we're fine with Jurkovich. We're fine with Garwo. These guys are warming up, so we would know if they're out. Same thing goes for Flowers and Jaden Williams. But again, Wake Forest poor on defense, particularly bad against the run. Garwo is 6,100. He is a firm cash consideration. Carry counts of 30, 24, and 25 over the last 3 games. Becoming more active in the pass game, still something that he doesn't do the best, and he will cede some work there. But they've moved this backfield towards Garwo as a feature back, and he's a very strong play today, takes advantage of this poor Wake Forest run defense. Jurkovich is very active in the run game as well. He has at least 7 designed runs in 3 straight games, and that does not include his scrambles. He already has 256 yards on the ground, and he's only played in 5 games. So Jurkovich is a great dual threat. He is much more affordable on FanDuel. There was a question in the chat about FanDuel cash quarterbacks. I think Jurkovich is very much in consideration over there. And you can also stack him. The target distribution is going to be narrow between Zay Flowers and Jaden Williams. Jaden Williams at 3,200 is target counts of 5 and 5 in back-to-back games. And Jalen Gill is now a game time decision here with the flu. So Jaden Williams stands out to me as a potentially low-owned cheap stacking option with Jurkovich, a run back for Wake Forest, who's very cheap and is going to go overlooked because of this late news.
Any interest in Jurkovich and Garwo in the same lineup?
Not a ton. There's just other value on the slate I would rather get to, but I think you could do it. Most of my Jurkovich exposures on FanDuel.
Got it. There you go. That should be a good one. Again, one of the highest totals, of the 13 games we have, that and the Ohio State game are 2 of the best in terms of the totals. Doesn't mean, it's very competitive with some of these, just a couple points less, but you want to kind of look to this one. Next game, not so much. Georgia, 35-point favorite at Georgia Tech. If they can survive this, they will punch their ticket to the playoff. 54.5-point total. I mean, what's there to say? They do this every week. You would think, they're such big favorites. There's got to be guys, but Georgia just distributes it so evenly. What do you do here? They're 5 touchdown favorites, but we've seen this story before.
Yeah, we can keep this pretty simple here. There's nothing for DFS worth targeting on either side. So with Georgia, they're 35-point favorites. They're going to rotate Stetson Bennett and JT Daniels regardless. And then when they're up by a lot, last week they used Carson Beck and Brock Vandegrift. This Georgia Tech,
Charleston Southern. Oh my goodness.
Is Georgia Tech better? It's a 35-point spread. Georgia Tech just got shut out by Notre Dame, who's a significantly worse team than Georgia. They use 5 running backs. Kendall Milton's expected to return. So you might see upwards of 6 backs. They use like a 15 receiver rotation, and Georgia Tech's just not going to score. They're implied for 9.5 points.
Yeah. So I assume, again, you already just talked about how Georgia, they rotated on the other side. The last thing you want to do, I assume, is try to go against Georgia's defense. This team is just a complete Bowling Green write-off.
Yeah. Their starting quarterback's hurt. Their receiving volume has been depressed without him. They use a running back rotation. It's just not good.
I assume you didn't lay 5 touchdowns.
No, I did not.
No, sad. All right. Well, we'll keep going. Texas Tech plus 14 going into Baylor, 51.5 point total. Texas Tech has been a tough evaluation, at least for me, all year. They've had their moments, and then at the other times, I don't think they're very good. And part of that has been, quarterback situations that have been fluid and not a really defined role for some of these guys. But coming into this game against a good Baylor defense, what do you think Texas Tech is going to try to do, and do you think they'll be successful?
I have no idea what they're going to try to do. They, at times, have gone a little run heavier with SaRodorick Thompson, Xavier White, Taj Brooks. Their quarterback, Donovan Smith, is a dual threat too. And they've phased out their best pass catcher, Eric Ezukanma. Last week, he popped back up for 9 targets. Early in the year, he was a target monster. They rotate Kalen Geiger on and off the field. 1 week, he plays 50% of the snaps. The next, he plays like 89. So the rotation's really bad for this team. They use a rotation at running back, a rotation at receiver. And Ezukanma is the only player with a consistent role. And that's only in terms of snaps. His target counts are extremely volatile, just 6.5 per game over the last 4. They have a 19-point implied team total, and Baylor plays extremely slow, extremely run-heavy, and their defense is good, which does not indicate to me that this is going to be a high-scoring environment for Texas Tech. They're another team I'm just writing off.
Interesting. On the other side of this game, Baylor is a team, again, we don't love to talk about them, but at times they've had some relevance with Bohannon. I guess you could talk about Smith and Ebner in the backfield, Thornton on the outside. They've got a healthy implied total at 33 points here. Is there enough production for these top end guys to get there? Or is it just another team that, although they probably win the game for DFS purposes on a 13 game slate, they're not a priority?
Because they run so much, their backs are pretty interesting. Bohannon has been in and out of the lineup a little bit this week in terms of practice, but he's warming up now. So I expect him to be out there. He's good for the offense. He's efficient. They just don't use him a lot. So he's tough for DFS because the ceiling is limited. He's like a poor man's Desmond Ridder. And then that stems down to the receivers. Like Tyquan Thornton has a target share north of 30%, but he hasn't seen more than 8 targets in 4 straight games. It's like Treylon Burks, where if he doesn't catch a long pass, he's just going to bust your lineup at 7K. In the backfield, though, they run the ball so much that both Abram Smith and Ebner are in consideration. It's like a 60-40 split. Ebner handles more pass catching work than Abram Smith, and Ebner actually has 4 and 7 targets in back-to-back games. He doesn't carry the ball as much as Smith, but again, we need value. So at 4.4K, I have some lineups with Ebner. He takes advantage of a Texas Tech defense that allows over 150 yards per game. And Abram Smith, as well as Ebner, actually pop for values in terms of projection. I would not play them in the same lineup, but I think you can make constructions with either.
Could you construct with Bohannon and Ebner, considering that some of his value is in the passing game?
I X'd out Bohannon.
Okay. Well, that makes it tougher to get to him then. Anything else from this game? If I had to bet it, I would probably lay the points with Baylor, but I didn't bet it.
That is exactly how I feel.
Man, Michigan is taking serious money. It looks like it's going to tick to 6.5.
Yeah, I don't know. I only saw Master Teague was out, but I am going to bet it again if it gets.
That would make the spread go the other way.
That you would think so.
But that's all right. Whatever. We will see. We'll monitor that. That's more on the betting standpoint. I don't think we need to worry. On the DFS side, we know what they're going to do. Oregon State and Oregon, the Civil War, 60.5 point total. The Beavers are 7-point underdog going into Oregon. I don't know. These are pretty interesting teams. Pac-12, obviously not a conference we get a ton of because they rarely play early. So this is something that you're probably more familiar than maybe some of the viewers. What have you made of a team like Oregon State? Obviously, they've got a running back that gets some serious work. Not the highest pass rate in the country out there. So does that stifle what we want to do, even with a healthy total, or are there guys that we can play here?
I think you could look to Baylor in tournaments. BJ Baylor, that is, not Baylor, the team.
Not the team. Okay.
No, not the team. And it's because the total here is good at 61 points. So even with Oregon State as a 7-point underdog, Baylor has gotten a consistent workload, over 20 carries in 3 straight games. He averages over 100 yards easily. So he's very, very efficient. The issue is this Oregon State team rotates so many receivers. Only Trayvon Bradford plays a consistent role here, and he only averages 4.6 targets per game. Behind him, it's just a nasty rotation. None of them are expensive, but you're rolling the dice on one of these guys catching a touchdown. So it's very difficult to get to Oregon State, even though the total is pretty healthy here. If I'm playing a guy on the Beavers, it's BJ Baylor. Chance Nolan, you mentioned the issues. He is somewhat mobile, but he's similar to Bohannon in the fact that he's not active enough in the run game to overcome his game manager role.
I mean, it's just a game. So the thing that's interesting, talked about Baylor. Do you worry if they fall behind that he could be phased out? Will the game devolve? Will Oregon State open up and throw the ball? Or do you think this is a situation like that? Yesterday, Tyler Beatty ran the ball 41 times, even though Missouri was not remotely in the game against Arkansas. Do you think they stick with Baylor on the ground regardless?
Yeah, to some degree. And he's not active in the pass game. So that's the difference between Beatty and Baylor when they are in. Yeah.
I thought they were killing. I mean, literally every play they would give it to Beatty.
I mean, he was excellent in DFS.
I bet.
But I hope he feels okay today.
Yeah, you can't take that much punishment. Anything else from the Oregon State side before we move to the home team?
I don't think so. I think we hit everybody who's relevant.
So what do we have here? Obviously, this team's got a healthy implied total, 34 points. Got guys like Dye. We did have a question about a flat min receiver in Hudson for Oregon. Are there priorities? Are there cash viability? Talk to me about this team.
Well, 2 of their best receivers are hurt in Johnny Johnson and Jalen Redd, and Micah Pittman transferred. So for the first time all year, we have a condensed opportunity share for these Oregon receivers. It's going to be Devon Williams, and it's going to be Chris Hudson, who is the min price receiver. I'm guessing was mentioned in the chat. I'm kind of in and out of the chat right now, trying to monitor news on Twitter, but Hudson had 8 targets in their last game. He played on almost every single snap, and I do not see that role changing because they are running out of healthy receivers right now. Just the fact that they have so many injuries and transfers in this program. Hudson, he should be a primary beneficiary of that. The concerns with him are the slow pace, the high run rate. Can Oregon State keep this competitive enough where they just don't take the air out of the ball? At the min price, I think that's completely fine. I think Hudson's cash viable based on the 8 targets we saw in the last game. And again, 7-point spread, 61-point total. This game probably comes in a little under-owned based on how these teams play. Brown is somewhat interesting here, 7,700. I would rather play a guy like Travis, I think. Very similar skill set. Brown is more active in the run game than like a Chance Nolan or a Bohannon. So he is in play to me, even though he mainly occupies a game manager role. And then you look at Oregon State's defense. They've been pretty giving against the pass. So as long as Brown has even moderate volume, I think he can exploit that matchup. I do think Travis Dye pops back from his 6-carry game they saw last week. They just got absolutely annihilated by Utah. So Travis Dye should come back into his somewhat of a bell cow role. Byron Cardwell is a player they'll use as a change of pace. He has at least 7 carries in 4 straight games. And I even think Cardwell could be interesting in tournaments because of his price. Again, we kind of need to balance these really cheap backs and figure out who we want to play.
So a couple of things there, because you summed it up nicely. Within this game, would you rather play Travis Dye or Baylor on the other side?
I would rather play Dye. And
then bringing in Hudson, obviously this would be for the flex. Would you rather use him at the flat min or go to, like the McDonald's of the, some of the flat min running backs we talked about?
I would rather play Hudson. If you were specifically focused on the flex.
Yes. Okay. That makes sense. This is a team, again, we always joke about with Oregon. They have so many guys on the outside, but for various reasons, as you mentioned, injuries and transfers, this is the first time where it is a pretty tight rotation. It's a good matchup. I think this could be sneaky high scoring. One of the better games for DFS, in my opinion. I wouldn't mind stacking or getting some exposure to both sides of this one. So we've got that. We're about halfway home and we're doing just fine. Appreciate that, Taylor. Dropping a little super chat in there and hitting that like button. We've got a lot here. And again, if you guys are interested in more content, not just on the college football side, but the college basketball side, we've got packages all over the place. And you can get 25% off your first month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Use that promo code CFBLBL. That would be College Football Live Before Lock. We've condensed in CFBLBL, 25% off. You're going to get all that and NFL and NBA and all the tools that Matt, Alex, the entire team have week in and week out. Plus, you hop in the Discord. You get our betting picks, our betting card for the week. So no reason not to do that. A lot of fun, a lot of good people in there. The next game, Northwestern, Illinois, 44.5-point total. This could be pretty bad. These are just bad teams, honestly. Not a fan. What do you got here? Are these guys relevant? Is anyone on Northwestern? I mean, we've talked about them a lot, but I can't remember a time where you were really interested in them all year.
That is 100% true. I have not been interested in Northwestern, but this is one of their better game environments. Typically, they're large underdogs. And now we have a spot where they're only 6.5-point underdogs, 7-point underdogs in some spots to Illinois. The concerns are it's a really low total overall. They platoon quarterbacks, so that's not ideal. But for the receivers here, sometimes they get cheap volume. Against Illinois, I'm not really interested in them. I think there's other cheap receivers to consider. The one player who is, I think, a pretty decent value is Evan Hall, their running back, 25 carries in the last game. They're starting to phase out Andrew Clare, and Hall does have workload in the pass game. He's averaging 5.3 targets per game over their last 4. So he's just seeing a larger workload here. Illinois is a pretty strong defense overall. When you look at like a per attempt basis, they allow a decent amount of production on the ground because other teams just run against them when they're ahead. And Hall might be able to do the same here. So he's a volume-based play, and he's the only one I have a lot of interest in for Northwestern.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, obviously, Northwestern is underdog, but compared to where they normally are, this is one of the more competitive games. So it is possible that they're winning and they actually are employing a guy like Hull late in the game, running the ball a lot. They don't get those opportunities too often. On the other side, I mean, Illinois did cash the regular season win total. I was happy about that. Thank you, Penn State. But other than that, I mean, it's been an up and down year for a team like this. And they're another one, Matt. I feel like we talk about them often. I always ask you, Chase Brown comes up occasionally, but other than that, it's hard. Is there anything else besides Brown in the backfield that we need to talk about, or do we even need to talk about him?
We do need to talk about him. He's a bell cow back, and he's somebody that's similar to Hull, actually. He's like in a much better matchup than he typically is in. Illinois is a rare favorite here, and he's the only one that occupies a significant workload for this team. I don't think we need to be as worried about the pass catching role for for Brown, because they're projected to be up in this game. So for him, the workload has just been so solid. And then he actually has matchup on his side in this game too, which Hull does not. So Northwestern allows 233 yards per game nearly. And in competitive spots, Chase Brown, you look at like the last 4 games, he's carry counts of 32, 18, 32, and 13. You guys, I'm sure, can see which games Illinois was somewhat competitive. So I'm expecting a lot of that here. Just a heavy workload for Chase Brown in a game where they are favored. So I'm looking for this to come in more on the 32 side rather than like the 13 side.
Anything, I know the answer to this, but I just want to get it out there. I assume you're not even going remotely near the passing attack for Illinois.
That is 100% true.
Yeah, for good reason. That's just, we did have a question just now. Can you play Brown and Hull in the same lineup?
Yes, I think so. Both teams are just insistent on running the ball.
And while we're on the game, cash, Garwo for Boston College or Brown?
I would play Garwo. They're not the same price, so it's
okay.
I don't know your 1v1 or your 2v2.
5 games left. We'll stick in the Big Ten for a little bit. Penn State, 4-point favorite. Michigan State, 51.5. Teams that at times they've had their moments, but ultimately they turned out not to be that good. Man, the spread is up to 5.5. Penn State is taking a lot of money. You mentioned we were on this very show last week, and the Clifford news, he was out, then he was in. They tried to play him. He was wildly unable to play. They went to the backup. Then they got it in gear against Rutgers. Is that all behind us? Is Clifford good to go today? And what does that do for Penn State?
I think he's good to go. I mean, he was sick, so I have no idea if he's healthier or not, but you would think a week removed, he should be feeling better. And this is a good matchup for him quietly. Right now, Michigan State is very, very giving against the pass, allowing 360 yards per game. Penn State plays extremely fast. They have a pass rate of 54%, so very pass heavy too when they're out there. Clifford is very cheap. He comes in as one of the better cash options for DK, and he is somewhat mobile, which helps as well. I assuming he's not sick, I think you could play him with confidence. Dotson is the preferred stacking option. He was over 13 targets in each of the last 3 games before Clifford left their previous contest early. He averages 11.7 on the year, nearly 100 yards. So Dotson's an excellent play. Parker Washington's too cheap for his volume. He averages 7 targets per game, and he's 4,100. So he's another very good value option. I even think Keandre Lambert-Smith could be a cheap stack on option if you're double stacking Clifford. The run game is very hard to get to. Kevon Lee has worked as the feature back, but Noah Cain and John Lovett, when he's healthy, are both also involved. So I don't think that's a strong place to target. But Penn State being the favorite here, even though it's in a close game, I think you can play some of these guys.
If you do go to the double stack and hope that Clifford, just for reference, Clifford on Prize Picks, we're at 224.5 passing yards. I think in the right game script, he can push over that. If you double stack, are you looking to someone like Walker on the other side, or are you going to maybe one of the pass catchers who's healthy, because Michigan State has lost a couple of key guys on the outside? What do you think is left for the Spartans offense?
Yeah, it's tough. Walker's hurt too. He's going to play through it, but just 6 carries last week. Some of that the function of game script, but Jordan Simmons did 7. So Walker clearly was not healthy. They lost Jaden Reed. They lost Jalen Naylor. So Trey Mosley's their number 1. He's 4,300. Just expecting a lot of inefficient play from Michigan State. And we saw that with Peyton Thorne last week. His top 3 options are all hurt now. So it's just, you're not going to see the same efficiency from him at this point. But you have very cheap stacking options in Mosley, Montery Foster, Keon. Keon Coleman, that is. These are the guys you would look to as run backs. But I think there's better options.
Anything else in this game? From a betting standpoint, I mean, if you wanted to piggyback on Penn State, I get it. I don't really want to do that. I think it could be low scoring. Chad was just pointing that out. Anything else from either side?
I don't think so. I think the total reflects that it could be low scoring. It's a middling game overall, with most of the value coming on the Penn State side because of price.
Go to the SEC first. No, we had Georgia, but that only half counts. Bama, Auburn, Iron Bowl. Bama's 20.5-point favorite, 57-point total. Bama can avoid, they don't have the luxury of messing around. They need to win these games. I would hope they'd figure it out here. Talk to me about Bryce Young, one of the Heisman. He's not the favorite, but he's in the discussion. He's got guys on the outside. He's got dudes in the backfield. How do you attack Bama, who should put up a lot of points today?
Yeah, Bama is another great team to target. Oftentimes we see ownership focus on the Ohio State side, and Bama, they have just as high of a ceiling. The issue with Bama here, I think, is that you have a team with a lower total overall compared to Ohio State. The total in the game is 57. Right now, the spread is 20.5. So their implied team total rivals Ohio State. But it's an offense that's just been slightly less explosive. With that said, if you take the approach and play Bryce Young in tournaments, I think the ceiling is just as good. He averages over 300 yards per game. He's easy to stack between the top 2 receivers, arguably even easier to stack than Stroud, because you don't have to predict between 3. It's only deciding between Mechie and Jamison Williams. And the target volume favors Mechie. The efficiency favors Williams. I think both are certainly in play. Mechie's a little bit cheaper, so he's the guy I've been getting a lot of. But definitely stack this game. You could get to any one of those premier Alabama players. You can also play the runner and Brian Robinson. He's like Henderson, where in competitive games, they're willing to run him more. 27 carries in their last game, 3 targets. He's just a monster on the ground.
That's the thing. So you mentioned in competitive games, they're happy to do that. This is, it's a big time opponent in name, but there are 3 touchdown favorites. Alabama hasn't looked great at times, no doubt about it. Do you worry about, when they cover spreads, usually you don't see that type of volume, or is that something that's why he's a GPP play and you don't really have to worry about that?
Yeah, 100%. I think he's like questionable for cash, I would say, but it ultimately comes down to, it's a 3 touchdown game. And if Bama plays to that, you might see him closer to the 9 and 13 carries he had in the 2 prior weeks, rather than the 27 he saw last week in a close game against Arkansas. So that's the concern for cash games, is that he's in the 13 carry range.
Snowing in the big house. Good.
Which it's like crazy to say that, like, okay, Alabama's going to win this game by 3 touchdowns if they play to the spread, but that actually might hurt Robinson.
Absolutely. It's not the same as Georgia, but we see this happen sometimes because if you don't run hot with touchdown variants, you might not have the volume to rack up 100-yard bonus and other things. If it stays competitive, he's going to get his. You just have to hope that I would normally say that Bo Nix on the other side, but that is not the case. Do you think TJ Finley and this offense can do anything? I mean, do they lean on Bigsby and Hunter? What does Auburn do to try to stay competitive?
So Finley's been really bad in his career.
Yes.
I don't think he's a huge downgrade from Nix, who hasn't been good himself. Nix is having the best season of his career, but that's not saying a lot. With Finley, he's not very mobile. The only thing that he benefits from is the offense as a whole. They're very pass heavy and they're up tempo. So I don't want to play Finley by himself, but perhaps the raw volume makes one of these pass catchers interesting. Shedrick Jackson is 3,400. He had 9 targets last week. He could just see enough raw target volume where if you're stacking Alabama or you're even just playing Mechie or Williams, maybe you want to use a guy opposite him on the other side in hopes that Auburn can keep this somewhat close and have these guys access their ceiling. So Cedric Jackson's my favorite for that. But you also have Demetrius Robertson, Kobe Hudson looks like he's going to be back. I expect there to be a little bit of a timeshare between him and Jarvarius Johnson. But for me, it's Shedrick if I'm playing anyone on Auburn and the pass catchers. Bigsby's now kind of taken off. He's played way ahead of Jarquez Hunter. And he's been somewhat active in the pass game too, even though Shivers takes on most of the pass catching work. Bigsby's a tournament play I think you could look to in this price range.
Yeah, listen, to me, it seemed like a health issue. And now that he has taken on a lot of work, and you've mentioned several times, and you're right, Hunter's been fantastic. There's no doubt, but they seem more than content to give Bigsby the lion's share. And he's not completely phased out if they fall behind. So I don't mind that. I just worry if Finley's not good, this game could unravel pretty quickly. Quick question. Any concern with potential snow in games like Penn State, Michigan State, or Ohio State, Michigan?
No, I don't care about snow unless it's a blizzard and LaShawn McCoy is playing. Yeah,
that's right. Shady. Hopefully, I hope it is a blizzard. I not that people can do, of course, what you want. I did bet Michigan. So I am in against you here. One of us should win, or maybe it'll land on 7 and we'll somehow both have bad things happen, but we will say,
not, man.
Yeah, no, I actually took Michigan money line. I didn't want to lay or get 6.5. That's no good. And it did move to 6.5 at a lot of places. 3 games left. Indiana plus 15 at Purdue, 50.5 point total. Again, Big Ten teams that at times have really struggled, but it doesn't mean that we can just straight ignore them. So let's start with the Indiana side. What is left for them? Guys in the backfield have stepped up, but it looks kind of committee-like. Freifogel. Who do we target on a team like this, even though they are sizable underdogs in not the greatest total out there?
The best thing we can say about Indiana is that they're getting a good look at their recruits. Their 4-star Donovan McCulley is going to start again. He's somewhat mobile, pretty inept as a passer, leaves a lot to be desired. This team has a 17.75 implied team total, so I don't think we want to spend a ton of time here. The main thing is, do we want to run back one of these pass catchers when we're using Purdue stacks? And I think you have some interest in Freifogel. He's just a victim of the offense. He's a very good player in a vacuum himself. But again, there's just so much inefficiency here that he's only averaging 44.5 yards per game. The backfield has devolved into a 3-way committee. I don't think this is something we can target. Stephen Carr has been hurt. He's an ankle sprain. I don't expect to see him here either. So Indiana, it's basically just, do you play Ty Freifogel or do you run the Purdue side by itself, which I have a lot more interest in because they're 15-point favorites and they run one of the fastest offenses and the pass heaviest offenses in the country.
David Bell, you talk about O'Connor. These are guys that come up a lot for us. Is the Purdue stack in play? And if so, how do you think your lineups are going to fall with them?
Yeah, Bell is the best price-adjusted receiver on the slate, even though he's 7,300. He has at least 14 targets in 4 straight games. He's averaging 15.8 over the last 4, averaging 120 receiving yards. No matter what happens, Bell is the engine of the offense. So when they get up in games and if Purdue plays to the spread, Bell is going to be the reason they got there. He is so involved in the offense. From there, I'm interested in Milton Wright as a wide receiver too. He's a bit expensive for my liking, but he still has 8.5 targets per game in the last 4. Jackson Anthrop is a cheaper player you could definitely get to. He has at least 3 carries in 4 straight games, and he's averaging 5.8 targets. So he's like a cheaper version of Keaton Thompson. very involved and would be a cheaper stacking option too. You could also use Payne Durham, who's now in his third game back from injury. He was the second leading receiver before that injury, so you're buying really low on him at 3,500. I even think there's some intrigue with Xander Horvath, who outcarried King Doru in their last game. The issue with Horvath was injury, and he was expected to be the lead back in the preseason, but obviously the injury limited him. Now he's working ahead of Doru. He's 3,500, so he's another one of these backs I would be trying to mix in near the minimum.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation. I do think Purdue, though, as you summed up, they've got some nice pieces. I like the way their offense is kind of constructed. And they are sizable favorites, even though it's not a high total. A lot of that's because of Indiana, not Purdue. They're fine team total wise. Man, our chat loves Ohio State today. I'm on an island, so could be I might be doing the walk of shame Game of Thrones style after this, but we will see. 2 games left. Virginia Tech 7-point underdog at Virginia, 63.5 point total. What is going on with Virginia Tech's quarterback situation? Let's start there.
They're using 2 guys, so I would not play either. They're going to use both in this game. Braxton Burmeister has not been good, so you're going to see Connor Blumrick, and rip to that coaching staff. Fuente made a horrible decision letting Hendon Hooker go before he was fired, and deservedly so.
Anything with the platoon at quarterback, does that make the skilled position players unplayable? Because we know Virginia's defense is just not good. I mean, obviously Armstrong helps them offensively, but defensively they can't stop anybody.
100%. And I think you maybe could run back a pass catcher. If I do this, it's probably Tavian Robinson, but ultimately these pass catchers are pretty expensive for an offense that's been fairly inefficient. I mean, Trey Turner has been hurt. He's now back, but Tavian Robinson, he's a guy averaging 5.8 targets per game. He's 5,600, which is a lot to pay for that. It's the game environment that props up these Virginia Tech guys. So I think if you're running them back on a Virginia stack, I think it's viable, but they're not the best players because of price. The one interesting consideration I have here is Blumrick. And I kind of want to leave some lineups just with an open quarterback spot or an open super flex spot in case he starts the game and he plays the whole time. They know what they have in Burmeister, and this team is not live for anything this year. So I think there's an outside chance that Blumrick starts and plays the whole game. He had 18 carries in their last game. He's extremely mobile. So that's something I'm considering, just like with 1 or 2 lineups in large field tournaments, leaving your super flex open with multiple other spots. You can make pivots if he doesn't start, but that's just an interesting consideration for tournaments. It's not something I would do in low risk contests.
But what you are saying though, and I just want to make sure, if you do go that route, you're fine though, just islanding him, considering that all his upside's probably on the ground.
He might, yes, I would play him naked. He might just be a late swap guy. Like if you get flamed in the early games, maybe you late swap off like Armstrong to a Connor Blumrick and then you load up somewhere else. But I don't know if he even starts. This is all hypothetical.
No, but it's good. You know what? Listen, in large field tournaments, similar to, you see sometimes in NFL Showdown, you're like, how did someone come up with the backup quarterback? That's insane. Yeah, it is insane. Of course, 99 out of 100 times it's not going to work. But when it does, can be the difference. So I totally get saying I'm willing to burn a couple lineups on that narrative. On the other side, I mean, Armstrong has been absolutely phenomenal all year. The guy is like basically a lock for 300 plus yards through the air. Can you stack him up with his guys on the outside? They are a favorite. They are at home. I mean, it has all the makings of a pretty clear top end stack.
I think Armstrong is going to come in under owned because of the tightness of pricing. He has as much of a ceiling as anybody. He's extremely mobile. He averages 400 yards per game. He's just priced in a tier that's very expensive. He's a lot more palatable on FanDuel, but I think you can stack him on DraftKings all the same because you have access points to really cheap pass catchers with him. So you could run a double stack with Armstrong, Keats, and Thompson, who's underpriced for his role. Even though he's 7,200, that's still not enough. And then you can run a Rashawn Henry or something at 3,900. So the overall double stack is not expensive. And this team still has a 35-point implied team total. They're throwing the ball 64% of the time, and they run 79 plays per game. So I'm not even sure we need to think about the run game. And when we do, Brennan Armstrong active enough in that capacity where I think he just absorbs enough rushing production where you can avoid Talapapa, Hollins, and these other guys. And then you have a cheaper stack because Henry's so cheap. The one caveat here is Billy Kemp is hurt, and he played last week. He had 3 targets, but he was only on the field for about 20% of the snaps, and then he had to exit. I have no idea if it was an aggravation or if it was just Kemp was limited and that was the role he was going to play. Now he's healthier. We just don't know. Watch his status pregame. Kemp being out would be a huge benefit to Rashawn Henry.
Anything else from this game?
I don't think so. I like the Virginia side quite a bit with their total.
Do you have any? We're going to move to this last game. We'll take some questions. Do you know the status of Quorum?
He's playing.
Yeah, good to go. Wisconsin 7-point favorite over Minnesota. This is a big time game. Minnesota wins. If Wisconsin wins, excuse me, they should have their shot next week. That'll be very interesting. 39-point total though, not going on. Talk about your new guy, Brendan Allen. Is he in play here? He's just been running through all the defenses fresh off his Sweet 16. He's probably feeling good, feeling fresh. This guy, he is very good, and they obviously want to run the ball. Can they do that here against Minnesota?
Yeah, Minnesota, we've talked about this a lot. They haven't played anybody good at running the ball since Ohio State in week 1. And Ohio State, they didn't even choose to. They tried to use Stroud in his first game, and we've seen Stroud improve a lot since then. But Minnesota hasn't faced any good rushing attacks the entire year. Last year, this same unit that returned 10 starters was bottom 3 in the country in run defense. And now facing Wisconsin, I do not expect these numbers to hold up. Allen isn't active in the pass game. He doesn't need to be. They do not care about using their backs in the pass game, and knock even on Jonathan Taylor coming out. But Braylon Allen, he is 25 and 22 carries in back-to-back games, averaging well over 100 yards as one of the most efficient ball carriers in the country. I think there's 2 reasons to play him in tournaments. One, if you play one of these expensive backs, it could be Henderson, it could be Brian Robinson, it could be Allen. I think you're flipping the build, the popular build. I expect a lot of people to be playing Dotson and Bell and the Ohio State receivers, foregoing the expensive backs in favor of Garwo, Brown, and some of these cheaper guys. So just by playing one of the expensive backs, I think you have a more contrarian build. Then if you go to Allen, I expect him to be the least owned of the 3 between Henderson and Robinson. Maybe he comes in second owned, but you're still gaining some extra leverage there.
Yeah, and as Slim just mentioned, Prize Picks has Allen TDs at 0.5. I definitely think he could have a good game here. And we talked extensively on Betting You, which you can get every week podcast. Just search Betting You on the Awesemo family of podcasts about Minnesota's rush defense. They just haven't played teams that are going to do this to them. And that's why I think the numbers look okay. Talk to me about Minnesota, though. Obviously, Tanner Morgan is missing, and everyone would, legitimate NFL wide receivers on the outside. They're down to like their 5th string running back. They're going to try to run the ball, but do you think they can?
No, I don't. Wisconsin plays phenomenal run defense. They have some of the same issues as Minnesota, but their level of competition has been significantly better this year. Wisconsin has played good teams, whereas Minnesota has not, outside of Ohio State in week 1. And now on their 5th and 6th string backs, like Kai Thomas has a great workload, but Marquise Irving still siphons off carries. So it's not the complete like Trey Potts or Ibrahim role that we saw early in the year. They're both going to be involved to some degree. And now we're expecting efficiency to decline. I think there's still tournament options. Kai Thomas shouldn't be owned by anybody. And he does catch the ball a little bit. So there is some intrigue, but I think you just go Braylon Allen, or this game is one you ignore.
All right. We've gone through the games. We've got a couple of minutes. We'll take some questions. Everyone, we'll see what we can find here. Do you need Bell and Dotson in cash?
I'm playing them in cash.
Okay. I think that's the move. We had a 2v2. Armstrong and Key Thompson, or Stroud and Garrett Wilson?
I think you're going to get more leverage with the Armstrong side, but they're both such good stacks. I don't have an issue with playing either, to be honest with you.
We had a question from Max. Is Geiger in play as a punt with no price?
Not in my opinion.
So just to kind of sum that up, because we had a lot of people asking about like the concept with punt plays. Hudson for Oregon as the flat minute wide receiver, but like with the way the slate is falling, and Gavin's talking about this a little, do you see yourself possibly going to a different type of mentality and actually spending up for alpha receivers, doing it a little different? Like, how do you see your lineup construction going here and there?
I think spending up for alpha receivers is going to be chalk. Like, I think most lineups are going to punt one time and play chalk receivers, like chalk studs, and then play Garwo and Chase Brown. Like, I think the highest owned players in the slate are going to be like Dotson and David Bell and some of these expensive receivers.
So then on the flip side, then let me flip the question. Do you have any interest in paying for like Robinson and Henderson together and then maybe like structuring that way?
that is going to be really hard to do, because if you play them both expensive backs, or even Braylon Allen, if you want to mix him into the conversation, you're going to punt twice. And I would rather play one of the middling backs and Garwo, Chase Brown, and then one stud, rather than pay for two studs at running back and then punt two receivers.
Anything in terms of when you look at that with quarterbacks? I mean, you mentioned you're going to play two. Cash, you mentioned Jerkovich over on FanDuel, but for DraftKings, are there guys that you've honed in on, or do you think there's a pool of them that you could really get to?
Yeah, I think you're probably going cheaper. O'Connell, Clifford, Jordan Travis are all ones that stand out. I think Tagovailoa is an outside consideration here because of volume, but I think you're probably trying to pay down at quarterback. Not drastically, but kind of in that 6K range.
Mm-hmm. We had a question here, a quick one from FanDuel. Bradford for Oregon State or Turner on Virginia Tech, a 1v1?
I would play Turner.
Turner for the Hokies. What else we got? Olave or David Bell in a Stroud stack? He already has Garrett Wilson.
I would probably just go full-blown stack. Go both.
Go for it. Better
go
hope.
For it.
You better watch out. Aiden Hutchinson's coming for your guys. Real quick, Louisville and Kentucky is on the FanDuel slate. I know that's a very, very good game. I assume guys like Cunningham and the backs and Wandale are guys that you could play, right?
Wandale projects really well over there. And you could also play Rodriguez. Cunningham is a stud. You can play him anytime you want.
Any final, we're winding down here. We're all going to go enjoy these games. But any final like lineup construction thoughts? Yesterday the theme was, you mentioned that running back was so deep. You actually thought there was a chance you could get to 4 running backs in certain lineups. What do you see when you look at the slate, just as overall thoughts as people are finishing their builds?
I think for DK, 2 running backs is certainly viable today. Still trying to get 2 quarterbacks. I'd be looking heavily at late swap. I think there's a lot of chances late in the afternoon to get some leverage, because I think we do see a lot of concentrated ownership on these studs, but then you also have a low owned studs. We didn't talk a ton about Mechie and Jameson Williams. I think they both come in under owned. Keaton Thompson, I think, is under owned. So you could play Wicks, but there's a lot of very, very, I guess, direct pivots for these studs. And I would primarily look at that in the late swap format.
One last question. Is Donovan Edwards a good play today?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think it could be a little thin there as well. I will just say, obviously, you're going to see plenty of us. We've got bowl season. We've got championship week. But I know I can speak for Matt. This is one of my favorite shows of the week. You guys have been awesome all year, and we really do appreciate it. College football is something we've kind of grown here at Awesemo, and it's because of the support we've gotten from these shows. So just wanted to say thanks for all that. I love doing the show. I hope Matt enjoys it as well, but it's just been a blast all year. So nothing to do. I'm not going to say hit that like button or anything. I just wanted to say thanks there. Enjoy these games. Lock is upon us. And while you're watching that game, if you want some more Awesemo content, we're coming right at you. NFL Tournament Strategy Show is coming up next. We got a great team there taking you up, giving you guys some Sunday insight. So for me, for Matt, for Tyler behind the glass, good luck today, my friends. Enjoy the slate. If you have any questions, at Jazzraz DFS, at Matt_Gajeski. We'll enjoy it. We will be back next week talking more college football, and we'll see you guys then.